Can we talk about running for a minute? Running is not something I enjoy doing, obviously, but I know it's needed for myself and for all of us. Being active, moving around, it's one of the foundational elements for a healthy body. Who would you say, though, is the best runner? Is there a clear candidate? Or is the field just well too stocked with great athletes? Let's look a little closer. I don't think we can point to one specific person as the all-around fastest and best runner, because the field is deep with great athletes. But there are some who need to be given a highlight. And I want to do that to a few. One of them, Deion Sanders. Primetime, Neon Deion. Just a man with two nicknames, but also who played two sports professionally. He was an amazing football player and a really good baseball player too. But out of all his attributes of athleticism, his speed was one of his best traits. He once ran the 40-yard dash at 3.9 seconds. That is an amazing time. Let me put it in comparison for you. What is considered outstanding time for a 40 time for NFL hopefuls is around 4.3 seconds. Deion was a lot faster. We probably should mention Usain Bolt too. Usain Bolt is an Olympian from Jamaica who specializes in the 100-meter run. Calling Usain fast is not an accurate term. He is blazing fast. He is lightning bolt fast. He can run the 100 meters in 9.58 seconds. Now, that may not mean much to you for those of us who do not run professionally, but he outran the historical leaders in this 100 meters trial of Olympic glory by a lot. Tyson Gay, Johan Blake, Asafa Powell, all considered among the greatest, are nowhere near as fast as Usain Bolt. The Lightning Bolt himself holds titles in the 4x100, the 100 meters, and the 200 meters, with 3 Olympic medals, 4 world titles. Usain is fast, but he never had to try to outrun racism. Jesse Owens did, though. In 1935, Jesse Owens made sporting history by winning 5 world records and equaled a 6th one in all about 45 minutes. 5 world records and a 6th one was 1 second away from the 6th one. How about that? One of these records was the long jump, where he did 8.13 meters, which lasted for 25 years. But what's even more notable is the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Owens won 4 gold medals for America in the 100 meter, 200 meter, 4x100 meter relay, and the long jump. He managed to break or equal 9 Olympic records, and also set 3 world records. One of those world records was the 4x100 meter relay, where the quartet of men set a time that couldn't be beat for 20 years. Adolf Hitler, however, set up the 1936 Olympics while hoping that he could prove his theory where the Aryan race was superior. Instead, Jesse Owens and his 4 gold medals in 1936 led to the people of Berlin hail him as the African American hero. I love it. Excellent runners indeed, huh? Didn't even get a chance to mention Flojo, Speedy Gonzalez. Heck, I didn't even say Forrest Gump once. But there is one more who's so very under the radar. As a runner, we need to talk about him. And we're going to talk about him a lot. For the good reasons and the bad reasons. Like running away. We're going to be talking about the prophet Jonah. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at the book of Jonah in the series which we're calling Reluctant Mercy. As we go into this historical event of the prophet, one which God asked him for a specific ask and how he runs away from it. The book of Jonah has always been special to me. I'll explain that as we go along. But today we're going to be focusing on just the one single point that's of interest from chapter 1. Be prepared to follow God. Be prepared to follow God. Before we jump into the book, I think we need to paint a picture of background information. We don't have much background information, however, because that we normally like when we're going into a book. There is no given author. We can assume that Jonah wrote this book and was extremely honest and critical of himself, or somebody else wrote this about him, perhaps in consultation or with direction from Jonah himself. The when of the setting from the book of Jonah, when these events happened, is a little bit more clearer, however, because we have 2 big chunks of information that we know about the people that we know. One, we know about the people of Nineveh. We knew that the Nineveh, a city in the Assyrian kingdom, happened, and we know about Jonah. We can tell about Jonah from the 2 Kings 14:25, and the shout out that we get from that reference in the book of Kings, which we can now set historically, and the Assyrian kingdom, which we knew when it reigned. And of course, just to add the cherry on top of this historical information, we knew that Jonah was real because Jesus mentioned him, that he was a real and literal person. All that information can be boiled down into the book of Jonah probably happened around the year 760 BC. 760. Now that we have a good place to spelunk into this book, there's one little thing I need to mention. Is this a historical, fact-based story? Or is this just one giant allegory? To me, we know that the Assyrian Empire was real. Started and, ran through 722. But that's when they conquered Israel. We knew that Jonah was a real person, thanks to Jesus talking about the story of the great fish. Thanks to reference to him in the book of 2 Kings. Does that mean there's no allegory at all? Allegory being a story with a moral or hidden meaning? No, there could be allegory in here. There could be, yes. But that doesn't change the fact that this is considered literal and historical. So we're going to take it as that. That all this happens. All these wild things happen. So we're going to take it real. Let's look at start at chapter 1, and to help us understand to be prepared to follow God. Verse 1, chapter 1 says, Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish, paid his fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. In Jonah verses 1 and 2, we're given the instructions by God to Jonah as one of the prophets of Israel, one of the prophets of God. And one of the major themes we notice right out of the gates is the disobedience of Jonah. Jonah is the prophet of God, the person that God uses to speak his words, to speak his will to the people. But what seems out of place for this obedient servant is that he does not like the message that he's been told to give to the people group by the great Almighty, by the one who not only created all things, but established all things. And Jonah's critical of what God has to say. It would be like Job telling God in the trial of his life that we can find in the book of Job how he should have made the earth. In chapter 38 of Job, God is very critical of Job when he says, "Tell me if you understand. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the stars of the God's glory shouted for joy." God is critical of Job when Job tries to think that he knows more than God. It'd be like Job telling God, though, if we're taking this like Jonah is and from this example, you know, God, the state of Florida, filled with way too many crazies, way too hot, and all the hurricanes. Do better. That's not what happens. Or be like the prophet Nathan. As we looked in the story of King David, when God uses the prophet Nathan to show David blame in the time of his life where he slept with Bathsheba. Instead of those showing him the wrong and his sin, be like Nathan's coming up to King David going, "You know what? Don't worry about it. It's fine. You're the king. You can do what you want." Providing commentary and opinion was not part of the job description for the prophet. Relaying the words of God was. Instead, Jonah, like any other prophets, are to speak with the words that God tells them. Judgment or his will, no matter what it is, speak it to the people he tells them. They are called to be obedient to God and do. Jonah isn't. But then again, neither is Israel. In the time period of the nation of Israel, they were not obedient to God. Period. Their actions showed that they were disobedient. They desired to worship other idols like Baal. In the history of this great people group, where the 12 tribes came together to make one great nation, where they thrived and they prospered, where God blessed them and they worshiped God openly. That was the people of Israel, the Jewish people. That is until the wheels fell off in around 920 BC, when the nation went through what we can just call like a divorce, where the 10 of the 12 tribes broke off and made the nation of Israel, while 2 of the tribes were left and called themselves Judah. For Israel, though, in these 10 tribes and newly formed states, things got worse and worse as they continued to not worship God, and because of that, God allowed the Assyrian nation to come and invade them and make them slaves in exile, or again, around 720. This story of Jonah, though, is representative in his life and the life of people of God. The disobedience to God that we see in the nation of Israel, in the people of Israel and Judah, also in Jonah's life. Disobedience. Jonah should have been ready to go and to do what God told him to do. Be prepared. Instead, he complained. He did nothing. Jonah can be a lot like us. Dreams and aspirations are things we all have. Some of us, a lot of them. But at times, these dreams and wants for our life do not match up with what God wills for us, what God has picked out for part of his perfect plan for our lives. Our choices at these forks in the road when come is going along with the changes and follow God, or pull a Jonah. Try to do what we want. Fight God. Be disobedient. I would be critical of Jonah, except that I did learn this lesson really early in my life when I tried to run away from God myself. Tried to fight God for what he wanted for me in his life. Where I knew God had wanted me to be a minister and serve the church. You know what? I wanted to be a sports reporter for the Chicago Tribune. Well, yada, yada, yada. 10 years later, I eventually got my degree and for youth ministry. After I had bottomed out of the broadcasting industry, broke and humbled. I was ready to stop being disobedient, ready to do God's will for my life, and go to my Nineveh by serving the church and being a minister. Sometimes it's about being prepared to follow God when God tells you. Some of us take just a little bit longer. But things like this happen to all of us, where we have our desires and our wants, try to put them before God. But that's not how we're supposed to live. Instead, we need to trust God for what is best for our lives and not be the oil to his water. If I were in charge of my life, I would have been highly educated in a field that has no future. The newspaper. Yeah, crazy. Take it from me. Trust God and his plan for your life. The God who not only made you, but also knows your future and wants what's best for you. And be prepared to follow God and do what he says when he says it. Unlike Jonah. Remember verse 2 and 3 again. Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare, went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. All right. Jonah wanted to go to the great Assyrian city of Nineveh. Let's talk about why he wanted to go and tell these folks about God's great love and why Jonah didn't want to do it. The ancient city of Nineveh, which today is Mosul, Iraq, was one of the most affluent, self-important trade centers of the biblical world. This was a city brimming with people who did not know the Lord as their Savior and needed to know the Lord as their Savior. To know that they are perfectly loved by a God who created them just like us. So the obvious question that comes to me is, if this is such a dense population of people, and Jonah could see a need for something there, for them people to hear about God's love for them, why was he so against doing it? One reason could be that he had to leave Israel. He had to be a prophet and go tell other people, non-Israelite, non-Jewish people, about God. This would have been the first time God had told a prophet to go and minister, to preach, to teach to other people who are not Jewish. He would have been the pioneer, I guess, of missionaries. That could have just shook him. Or, this one is more likely though, God wanted to help and show forgiveness to these people who are not Israelites. These people of Nineveh. Why would God want to show the Assyrians their future doom if they were going to be, if they're so terrible? Why did didn't God know that these Assyrians, these Ninevites, were terrible people? terrible, about how extra cruel, how evil they were, wouldn't godly doom be justified? Well, they were evil. They were at a whole new level of evil. Historians tell us that the Assyrians would openly gloat at military victories in the battlefield. A battlefield that was still strewn with corpses, freshly killed. They'd start celebrating there. Assyrian Emperor Shalmaneser III, was well known for not only torturing and dismembering foreigners, but having people paint pictures of him dismembering and torturing people. Wait, it keeps getting worse. The cruelness of the Assyrian people was not only in how they treated their captives, as I just mentioned, but they also did this to the family of their captives, including burning children alive. One historian called the Assyrian Empire, in our modern day terms, as a terrorist state. And you know what? I kind of see it. I can get behind that. God knew all about this, though. He knew about every single detail that I tried to be polite with about talking about. He knew about all their actions, their intent. And he still wanted Jonah to go and preach forgiveness to them. Weird. It's kind of like, it's almost like God loved these people just as much as he loved you and me, as he loved Israel. I know, weird, right? But the thing is, it doesn't matter how privileged, how kind, how handsome, how mean, how poor, how ugly, how educated, how lack of educated you are. God sent the Lord Jesus, the Messiah, to earth to save all of humanity from their sins, from the punishment of their sins, eternal hell. Not just the people who live. God did not just send the Messiah to the people in Israel. Or, the first 10,000 people. That's all we're doing. Phase 1 is 10,000 people. Boca, heaven. Yeah. But that's not it. God is for all of us. No matter who we are, where we lived, when we lived, what we have or what we don't have. God died in all of our places so that we can all receive forgiveness. And the best part is, the worst of humanity can be forgiven by God. I'm talking serial killers, rapists, dictators, people of Nineveh can be forgiven. All of us can be forgiven. Jonah, us as well. All we need to do is be prepared to follow God and lead his leading and teaching. To help other people know God, that they are truly forgiven. Jonah needed to follow God's hand in going and evangelizing to Nineveh. No matter what they did, or doing in that case. But for you and me, it could be just as simple of helping out, talking with, or providing sustenance to the beggar on the corner. Maybe just hugging and showing love and kindness to the LGBT kid. Or trusting God to be a minister when you didn't want to. This is what Jonah should have done. But instead in verse 3, we see that Jonah does the opposite of it in every way possible. Verse 3 says again, "But Jonah arose to flee from Tarshish, from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare, went down into it, and to go with them to Tarshish, from the presence of the Lord." So this big-time prophet skirted his responsibility and ran away. Did the opposite of what God needed him to do, from not ministering to the people who needed to hear about God, to not even going in the right direction. Verse 3 told us that Jonah did not go to Nineveh, but instead went to the port city of Joppa, got on a ship that was headed to Tarshish. Geography's hard. Let's put this in modern terms. So, from Israel, Jonah needed to go 500 miles northeast to Nineveh. Instead, he travels 2,035 miles to Tarshish, which is mostly west. Not exactly a banner moment for Jonah, is he? So, let's put these in modern terms. Let's say Chicago is the home of Jonah. God then would call him to go to Nineveh, or in this case, Toronto, which is 500 miles away, east. Instead, he left Chicago, paused in Lockport, and headed 2,000 miles west to Bend, Oregon. Bend? Yeah, you've heard of Bend. Home of the last blockbuster. Pretty decent documentary. Oregon, in case you're wondering, is nowhere near Toronto. It's definitely not following God's perfect will and trusting God. But the thing that stands out most to me is that Jonah fled. Jonah ran away. But he tried to flee from God. It's not just the act of running away. He tried to flee from God. We cannot run away from God, ever. Why? Because God is omnipresent. God is everywhere. It's foolish to think we can outrun God or go somewhere where He's not. Psalm 139 tells us this, at this basic concept of God. Verse 1 of Psalm 139 tells us, O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts from afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways, for there is not a word on my tongue. But behold, O Lord, you knew it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot obtain it. Listen here to verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide me from you, but the night shines as day. Again, Jonah, foolish. That's the headline right now. Not only did Jonah think by going to Tarshish, fleeing to Tarshish, he thinks he could go and get away from his duties. He thought that by going there, God could not find him there. God would not know where he's at. It's kind of like when Adam and Eve tried to hide themselves from God after realizing they sinned. Or when Cain tried to hide after he killed Abel, after his brother Abel. Foolishness. Jonah did not want to go because Jonah did not think there was anyone redeemable in the city. That's pride and arrogance. And if we're honest with ourselves, we struggle with that too, with the same attitude. We think we know more than God. We think we know our futures more than the one who knows all and created us. We can make assumptions on people too, just like Jonah judged the people of Nineveh. We can make the same judgments on how people live, how they act, the choices they make. Like, for instance, if a person had tattoos, you know what our first thought is? They must be rebellious. Person goes to college. They must be a liberal or a socialist. person lives in the southern states of America. They must be a MAGA. That's a terrible thing to do. But if we're honest, I think we all do it. We have times where we prejudge people, just like Jonah did to the people of Nineveh. That does not mean that they don't deserve to hear the good news of Jesus and they be forgiven forever from their sins. To know that Jesus died for them, resurrected and is alive today. How can they have a relationship with God? How can they know about him if they've never heard of him? Jonah, Adam, and you know what the spoiler is? The people of Nineveh do change. Spoiler, we'll get to that later though. We cannot make the same mistakes that Jonah did by trying to run away from God because we think we know better. Follow God, accept him as your Savior, and start sharing his love with every person you know. Because there's not a human that's been created that can run away from God. Not Jonah, not even Usain Bolt. Still not fast enough, Mr. Lightning. See you next time.